They said they had long gray hair, glowing gray eyes, and they were 2 feet high with big hands. Its teeth were sharp and pointed, and its eyes the purest black. There was a clear, deep, fresh imprint of a small, child-sized hand. There was a little fire in the bushes that started out of thin air. They would always warn against members of their nation voyaging out into those hills to hunt, lest they be stolen away into the realm of the little people. Of all the weird personal encounters that people email me about, by far the most common are stories of little people. I'm not talking about children or short people, I'm talking about very small, human-looking beings that will show up sometimes to play tricks on people, and then disappear. Now, this phenomenon is so strange to me because it's one of the most common in folklore. It's very ubiquitous. Every continent has little people stories, but they're not the sort of thing that you'd see a big documentary made on, like you would on, Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or something like that. They're not very sensational. As far as I know, the phenomenon of little people sightings hasn't really been drilled into public awareness like some other monster stories have, except, I guess, in fiction. In fact, the only non-fiction fairy tale, for lack of a better word, that I think has been brought to the public by a mainstream outlet is the story of the Kootenay fairies, which is like supposedly a hoax that the English writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes series, looked into seriously, but was later, I guess, proven to be a hoax. And like way back in like the 90s, I remember there was a movie that came out on this subject. But other than that, I don't know of any little people stories that have been disseminated to the broader public by a major outlet like Hollywood. So that's why these stories are so strange to me. But in this video, we're going to read some personal encounters that viewers have left on my channel, and these encounters are set in Western Canada. And I'll do another video on Eastern Canada later. Without further ado, let's check them out. So we're going to start in the west in British Columbia, the westernmost of Canada's provinces. This comment's from Brennan Clarahan, 2288, 2 years ago. I've seen the little people camping along a river near Kelowna. We set up a tent and fire, and they came behind firelight, and 4 of them and a 2 to 2 foot tall with eyes that were like 3 inches wide. Only thing similar is a lemur, and those don't live in BC. I went to the car and got an axe. My Mexican date asked me what they were, and I just brushed it off. So let me read that again. They came behind firelight, and 4 of them and a 1 foot to 2 feet tall, with eyes that were like 3 inches wide. So big eyes, little people. Now, Kelowna is in the Okanagan, on Okanagan Lake, and there are certainly little people stories from the Okanagan Indians. So that definitely jives with old regional folklore. If you want to see my video on the interior Salish little people legends, I'll include that, a link to my video on that in the description. Next comment's Mark Niall, 7225, 2 years ago. I saw 2 different kinds of fairy folk near Sicamous, BC. One was greenish-gray color and about a foot high and looked like the little demons. The little demons. They wore clothing that blended in with the bush. The other looked at us, about 1 foot to 14 inches high, and wore bright clothes, reds, green, purple, etc. One day I was working on a train. We were parked in the siding waiting for a train to pass, and then field across from the tracks I saw beautiful girls. They were in long white nightgowns with flowers in their blonde hair. In a headband fashion. They were picking wild strawberries. They looked around 18 or 19 years old. They came up to the fence by the tracks and wanted me to come over so they could check me out. But sadly I couldn't leave my post. I wanted to go with them so badly that it hurt, but I could not. I don't know if they were fairy folk or ghosts, and I often think what would have happened if I went with them that day. I went back the next day and asked the people that owned the field. They did not know who they were or who I was talking about. Strange things indeed. So Sicamous is in the same kind of general area as Kelowna. It's further to the north. And I'm not sure what to make of the beautiful women. That is just like some Huldufolk stories from Iceland and New Iceland that I've read about. New Iceland is in Manitoba, west of Lake Winnipeg. A lot of the Huldufolk stories, Huldufolk means hidden people in Icelandic, and they're just, I don't think they're always portrayed as little people. They're just kind of like elves, like hidden people. They're supposed to live in rocks. And there's a story that I covered from Iceland about a guy, a young man, coming upon these beautiful girls who vanished into the mist. So it sounds like that's different from the first thing he saw. That was a greenish-gray color and about a foot high. And looked like demons, whatever that is. Okay, next one's Medusa Energy 1 year ago. While camping, my dad said fairies lived in those little moss houses around us. We were in the mountains, British Columbia. I didn't believe him, but for some reason it felt like I should leave these alone. Some kids were destroying them, and these kids were kind of evil their whole lives, so I don't know if the fairies made them suffer after or before. Next comment's Crusader Survivor 3 years ago. When I was about 10, camping with my family in northwestern BC, I was on a hillside with a bunch of purple flowers. I remember seeing a boy with purple hair sitting among the purple flowers. When he noticed me, he beckoned me with his hand to come play with him. I was just about to, and I heard my mom calling for me, and when I turned my head to look back at the boy, he wasn't anywhere I could see. I didn't think anything about it for decades, until I saw this video, and thought maybe the boy with purple hair I saw was one of these little people. I'm glad I didn't follow him. His kind face could have been a subterfuge of malice and ill will. So that's the first story I've heard of a little person with purple hair, or hair that's a weird color. Next comment's Rod Zor 2 years ago. I went for a walk one time in the woods in the evening, and next to a tree well off the trail, left my handprint deeply imprinted in the snow. Early the next morning, which was December 21st, 2019, I went back after the night there was a light dusting of snow, so my handprint was slightly covered, but next to it, there was a clear, deep, fresh imprint with palm lines and everything, of a small child-sized hand, right next to my hand. The weirdest thing was that in the snow around it, and nowhere to be found, were there footprints of anything. No animals, no people, nothing. It just seemed to form out of thin air. I did take pics, and it still baffles me. No one else had been out there. This was in British Columbia. That's a creepy story. If you'd like to watch this video without ads, please consider becoming a member of this channel and watching the ads-free version instead. You can do this on your phone or desktop by clicking the picture of my face and then clicking the join button to the right of the subscribe button. Since times are tough, I've decided to add a lower membership tier, which will give you access to my members-only videos for only $1 Canadian per month, or about 72 American cents. Sorry for the interruption, and enjoy the video. Next comment's Kevin Schindler 9425 1 year ago. Nocturnal dark-skinned people live around Powell River and Comox Valley area. They eat dead roadkill. We have seen them many times, running into the woods, from beside road ditches. They eat dead animals killed by cars, deer mostly. I've only seen female little people, no males, naked and strange to see. So the dark skin is a theme that I've seen a few times in, there's a story from the Stoney in the Rocky Mountains, Alberta's Rocky Mountains, of black, little people with black skin. And there's another story, which I think is Algonquin or it's some sort of Anishinaabe or something, from Ontario, of people with dark skin. I've done videos on both of those, and I'll include them in the description. And just for context, Powell River is a very, very nice little town on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia. You have to take a ferry to get there, a couple ferries to get there. And the Comox Valley is right across the Georgia Strait, or the Salish Sea, on Vancouver Island, on the, would have been the eastern shores of Vancouver Island. Next comment's Mayrish Carr 1 year ago. So glad to find something on little people. We encountered one on Silver Creek, BC. We're standing on my mom's second-floor patio, where my mom had draped an old Hudson's Bay blanket across the railing. I was explaining the points sewn into the material, when my eye was drawn to movement. I looked into the field, and a small man, maybe 4 feet tall at most, was walking through the grass looking down, as if searching for something he'd lost. I said, "Who is that?" to my mom, and she looked but couldn't see him. I then called my friend, and she could also see him. The little man heard us shouting, and looked our way, and then hid behind a small, low bush, and played peekaboo with us. Wanting a closer look, but also nervous, we got into my car and drove the 150 meters to where he was hiding, in a bush-covered dirt mound in the middle of a field, and he had totally vanished, and there were no footprints. This was in daylight, Labor Day weekend of 2015, and I was not under the influence of anything. So where's Silver Creek, BC? Okay, so it looks like it's in the northern Okanagan Valley, incidentally kind of halfway between Kelowna, not halfway between, but between Kelowna and Sicamous, where 2 of our stories took place. I think at the end of this, I'm going to have to do a map with the different points plotted on it, just to see where everything happened. Next comment's Rod Zor 1 year ago. Awesome. I live in the Thompson Okanagan area near Kamloops. The only thing I've had happened, one of the weirdest, coolest things, is one time on a forest trail I was hiking in the evening, and in some fresh snow off the trail, under a tree, I splayed my fingers out and left my handprint clear in the snow. Oh, this is the same guy as before. Well, let's read it anyways. The next morning early, I went for another hike. No one else had been out there, and it's off the trail a bit. I remember it was December 21st, 2019. There was a light dusting of snow overnight, so when I got back to that location, the handprint I had left, and my footprints and everything else had all been covered with a light dusting of snow, so there were no fresh prints from anything there. No one had been there, but right under the handprint that I had left was the smallest child-sized hand, freshly pushed into the snow, right up against and below my palm. It was maybe half the size or slightly more than the 1/3 of the size of my hand. I don't have big hands, and you could see palm lines and everything. The thing is that there were no footprints anywhere. No animals, no boot prints. No footprints, just nothing. It was like it was pressed into the snow from thin air. I took pictures and still just stare at them sometimes, because you have to understand someone pressing their hand into the snow would leave tracks, and there were none. So one thing this story strikes me a little bit, I mean, maybe it's a ghost story. There are ghost stories like that, where ghosts will leave a little sign like that. Or maybe it's a little person story. But either way, very creepy. Next comment's the Checkweed Chad 1 year ago. Fascinating video. I work as a professional archaeologist, and I used to live and work in the Fort St. John/Fort Nelson area of northern BC, the traditional homeland of the Dunne-za or Beaver First Nations. We would sometimes have representatives of these nations, often elders, join us while we performed our work. Several elders from the Prophet River First Nation had told me how a section of their reserve lands, dominated by low rocky hills amidst all the boreal swampland, was the homeland of mischievous and malevolent little men. They also told me that they would always warn against members of their nation voyaging out into those hills to hunt, lest they be stolen away into the realm of the little people. The connections to other folklore you mentioned in this piece are fascinating. Would love to hear you discuss some beaver and slavey Dunne-za stories in future videos. Dunne-za legend of Wechuge is particularly unique and scary. I have done a video on the Wechuge, which I made after this comment was made. I'll link to that in the description in case you're interested in watching it. Wechuge is like clearly related to the Wendigo legend, but it's fundamentally different. A man-eating spirit that can possess people. So that's interesting that they can. The elders would warn against people going out there because they'd get stolen away by these little people. That is like the most common theme. All in every continent, little people want to steal you. If you go into their lair, into the woods, they will trick you, lure you, and take you to their abode, from which you can't escape. So strange to find that in, Europe and in northern British Columbia, everywhere. So weird. Next comment's Mark Twain 368 1 year ago. He's left some very kind comments, which I appreciate. I've encountered gnomes and elves in Vancouver's local parks. To be honest, I was under the influence of LSD at the time, but rather than mere mental hallucinations, I am certain these things were real beings on a higher vibration, or frequency, that the psychedelic drug permitted me to access. In short, I saw what is quite real, but beyond normal perception. And that's the thing I've heard before with people who do hallucinogenics, and you've heard about the DMT clockwork elves. People will go on these drugs and they will have these experiences that seem so real to them that they're convinced that these drugs are somehow allowing them to peer through the veil at some other dimension, for lack of a better word. I really hate that word. But it kind of adds another facet to the prism through which we view reality, and it allows you to see into the invisible world. If you've had your own experiences like that, please let me know in the comments. Next comment's Manly Joe Desjardins 7568 1 year ago. I've seen little people in the middle of the night next to a creek in Mission, BC. I was next to a little fire, and all by myself, then I seen them. They were standing completely still. Almost like that if they were completely still, I couldn't see them, but I can see them clearly. I left after about 2 minutes of looking at them, realizing what I was looking at. There were 4 or 5 of them. This was 3 years ago. I don't live there anymore, and I never went there again at night. They did have hats on, pointy ones. They looked like little garden gnomes at the time. I remember thinking that when I was looking at them. Now, if you're not familiar with fairy lore, that might sound kind of crazy, but that is one of the common themes that is kind of ubiquitous in, especially European little people stories. They wear pointy red hats, just like they're so often depicted in artwork and like the garden gnomes. Next comments Rick Horedsi V8Z 6 months ago. Among the Pacific Northwest Indian tribes is the legends of little people. I haven't heard about them in 30 years, but I remember my elders would talk about them from time to time. Quinault tribe, Queets tribe, Ho River tribe, and the Quileutes all had legends about them. Even as late as 1989, Indian people would see them. He's right, that's true. There's lots of legends from the Northwest Coast about them. I'll include my video on kind of native little people stories in the description. All across the country, not just the Northwest Coast. Next comments, Conjoyce 5207, 7 months ago. My girlfriend and I came face to face with a little person in the bush near Kelowna, BC, August 1977. And strangely, the being we saw, it's the little people that lived in the Kettle Valley area. You mentioned this in the video. I can't recall what she's referring to, but another story from Kelowna. Let me just check out what she's referring to. The only reference to the Kettle Valley that I can see in my work is the assassination of Peter Vasilievich Varagin, who was a leader of the Doukhobors. That was like a kind of a Russian cult, offshoot of the Orthodox Church, I think. They ended up settling in kind of the Slocan Valley, which is in real deep southern interior British Columbia, kind of north of Idaho. Doukhobors were famous for doing protests in the nude, and I think they did some arson, if memory serves. But anyway, the leader of them was assassinated in, it says here, October 29th, 1924, and his assassination has never been solved, so that's one of the weird Canadian mysteries that I covered in my video on the mysteries of the Kootenay Rockies, which I'll link to in the description as well. Next comment, Skull Venner 1 year ago. I grew up in a log cabin on Van Isle, Vancouver Island, and these little buggers were always around. Very rarely noticed outside, but I'd catch them watching me from behind objects and around corners regularly. I never told anyone. I have one very detailed story from Vancouver Island encounter with little people that I've included in, it's a video that's actually kind of popular right now for some reason, I don't know why, on subscriber encounters with little people in Canada. I'll link to that in the description too. But there seems to be kind of two hotspots, at least from the personal stories that people have told me. One of them is like Vancouver Island, and another one is Ontario, like southern Ontario. But anyway, let's keep going. Next comment's BC 4198, 1 year ago. Washington State First Nations people also have little people traditions, living in certain places along the Hood Canal and Columbia River, among others. And I've heard several versions of the braiding horsemains at night story, reportedly from all over the world. So I didn't know that the Washington natives had that, but I'm not surprised. And the braiding horsemains at night story, that's like, I've covered this in other videos. This is a phenomenon where people will, their horses will have these delicate, intricate braids that can't be undone in their hair at night. And there's all sorts of theories for what causes it. It's one of these weird universal folk tales where people will notice a strange phenomenon. All over the world, they'll notice this phenomenon, but they can't explain it. And so there's different folkloric explanations for what causes it. Next comments, Victor Seymour, 4979, 5 months ago. Great stories. Here in the west coast of British Columbia, on the Coast Salish First Nations peoples, traditional lands and waters, there are legends, stories, etc. Here as well are the little people, told by the local elders, but you can't tell kids today anything. I've seen the little people footprints myself in a beach, but I heard that they're up on the sacred mountains as well. Just like Sasquatch, they are alive and well here on Vancouver Island. Like I said, it's a storytelling from the elders on how long they've been here, and I believe them and all the stories, legends of the little people, and the Sasquatch. I'm not sure what the sacred mountains are, but I know there's basically like kind of one mountain range right in the center of Vancouver Island. Maybe that's what he's referring to. And I know that there are all sorts of native legends about what lives in those mountains. I think they were regarded as very dangerous, holy, full of paranormal energy, I guess. And interestingly, I know he's very controversial, but David Politis, the Missing 411 guy, has, in his book, Missing 411 Canada, 2019 book, he noticed that a lot of people seem to go missing in those mountains. And so they're one of his clusters, as he calls them. Anyway, kind of an interesting coincidence. Next comments, Caleb Chaff Official, 5 months ago. Ontarian here. I've seen a little person. I was on magic mushrooms. It scared the hell out of me. I said to my partner in my confusion and panic, would you kill a little person? So another psychedelic story. Next comments, Marish Carr, 5 months ago. My friend and I saw a little person in Silver Creek, BC in full daylight in 2015. Is this the same person who commented before? It is, okay, so Another description of the encounter in Silver Creek. Let's just finish it here. He was looking down and walking through grass as if he lost something. Then he noticed us looking at, pointing at, and discussing him. Then he hid behind the bushes and played peekaboo with us until we went to where he was, and then he vanished. No tracks in the dirt at all. He was maybe 4 to 4.5 feet. Okay, now we're moving into Alberta. And the first comment's from Louise Posdick, 7527, 3 years ago. At another time, I parked at a bank on White Avenue in Edmonton. As I came around the corner, I saw a very short man about 4 feet in height, who was dressed in a very long brown coat that had the long tails of the 1700s. His footwear appeared to be of about the same century. On his head was a fur hat. He was looking at a small piece of paper. He looked up at me and became very nervous, and fiddled with the paper. I nodded to him, and he quickly walked past me. I turned around to see where he was going, and he had disappeared. The day was the 26th of December, 2008. And it looks like Louise Posdick has another story. She says, I was living in the city of Edmonton and driving to take my dog to the groomer to have his toenails clipped. As I neared a church, I slowed down, as I knew there was a frost heave on the street. Out from a light standard popped a short, 3.5-foot man in black clothing and a black pointy hat over his very curly black hair. He carried a parcel in his hand and skip-hopped across the street, without his feet touching the ground towards a mail delivery van. My dog put his front paws on the dash and watched the whole thing without barking. I wondered at that time if the little man knew he had needed stamps on his parcel. When he reached the postal van, he disappeared. So it sounds like that's a different story. 2 different events in Edmonton. White Avenue is a very, very busy avenue. Next comment's Charles Wegg, 4858, 1 year ago. I'm from the Blackfoot Piikani Nation. One time when I was younger, my dad woke me up from sleeping. I just went to sleep, and he had told me he was sleeping outside in the back of his truck. It was summertime, very hot. He went inside the house to get a drink of water, and then heard them talking in Blackfoot, teasing him. He ran at them, and lightning speed they both ran into the basement, calling him. That's when he woke me up. He said they had long gray hair, glowing gray eyes, and they were 2 feet high with big hands. Interesting, so a house story. Long gray hair and glowing gray eyes. And they spoke Blackfoot. That's an interesting story. Next comment, Stan, 6243, 1 year ago. I swear I had an encounter with one of these little folk in Drumheller. I came from Calgary to do a roofing job, and as I was driving back into town, I saw something about the size of a large prairie dog by the road. I didn't pay it any mind, because I was more worried about deer on the road, but it looked like it did a little dance and threw something. A moment later, a beer bottle smashed on the front of my vehicle. Little bastard, I exclaimed. That's when I looked directly at it, as it turned to run into the ditch. It looked like a little man wearing a chicken feather vest. I told a local at the liquor store what had happened, and he told me that it was Drumheller's little bastard, which bemused me as I had not told him I had called the creature exactly that. The next day I did pick up at the Boston Pizza for supper, and they had a little gnome statue in the dining area. I asked the server why, and she said that the little folk are territorial, and the only way to keep them out of the dumpster is to make them think one was already on the premises with a statue. I hate working out of town. What? That's funny. So just like how you put like a owl statue to scare the birds away. So Drumheller is like a city in like northeast of Calgary, pretty close to the Saskatchewan border. And it's famous for like being in the Badlands. It has all these cool hoodoos and stuff. And it's I guess more famous for way back in the I guess late 1800s, early 1900s, they found a bunch of dinosaur bones there in the Badlands. And pretty close to Drumheller is the Royal Tyrrell Museum, which is a very cool museum with a bunch of dinosaur skeletons that have been, I guess, dug up in the area. So Drumheller is a hotspot for little people. I didn't know that. You know, something interesting is that some of the native legends from Alberta, Saskatchewan, say that little people live in, I think this is more a Plains Cree thing than a Blackfoot thing, but they say the little people live in the Great Sandhills, which is like in southwest Saskatchewan, this big area. It looks like the Sahara Desert. There's these big mounds of sand. And the Blackfoot said this was the land of the dead. This is where if you died and you were like a warrior, I think, this is the place where if you died, your spirit would go there if you were an Indian. And they'd hear phantom horses riding around at night, stuff like that. But I think the Plains Cree legends say that this area is a home for little people. And I've done a video on that before. But the Great Sandhills kind of remind you a little bit of the Badlands because it's just this weird area, very arid, not a lot of water. Nothing really grows there except for cactuses and very sparse grass, I guess. So the two areas are kind of similar. They remind you of each other. So I don't know if there's any native legends about little people in the Badlands, but I wouldn't be surprised. Next comment's way too faded, 420, 11 months ago. I was volunteering for a Native Youth Center in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, literally today, December 12, 2024. And the cultural advisor, whose name I cannot disclose, was a Cree elder with a vast knowledge. He told me how in his youth he was hunting in southern Alberta in the prairies, and he watched two of them dart across the trail 50 yards from him and disappear into a jut of rocks. So another interesting story from southern Alberta. Next comments, War Squigs painting 3 months ago. It ain't just Ontario. It was January 2018, during that minus 50 cold snap here in Alberta. It's near 3 a.m. and I'm outside having a cigarette. Yeah, I think only Canadians will have a cigarette in minus 50-degree weather. That's pretty intense. I heard this, chirping like a bird. I thought the yard light had woken up a chickadee or something. Then I hear what sounds like talons tapping on metal. It's 3 a.m., so no bird should be up. It's deathly cold, at minus 48 at 3 a.m. Nothing should be up and moving. So I'm looking around to see what's making this noise, and as I turn to look to another portion of the roof, this thing flies by me. It was about 1 foot tall, had a bluish-white color for skin tone, white hair that refracted like diamonds, and wings that looked like those of a dragonfly. Its teeth were sharp and pointed, and its eyes the purest black. It flew within 2 feet of my head, hissing as it passed me. I have no history of family mental illness, nor am I schizophrenic. I have no history of visual hallucinations, and I am in fine medical health. But I saw a 1 foot tall flying blue creature with black eyes, shark-like teeth, and dragonfly-like wings. The kicker? I told a friend who was into this face stuff. She pulled a book out from the early 1900s, some tome published in Britain about fairies. The thing was in this book as an ice spirit, some form of fae that are seen during cold snaps and in the dead of winter. Well, that certainly checks the hell out. I'm not crazy, but I saw a fae creature in 2018. And it actually kind of broke my perception of reality. What else is there in the folklore of man that still lives and breathes today? That is a really interesting story. I don't know anything about the ice spirit in British folklore. Maybe I'll just look it up quickly, see if I can find anything. So the first thing that comes up is, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but this is like Caoleek. This is Wikipedia. In Gaelic, Irish, Scottish, and Manx myth, the Caoleek is a divine hag associated with the creation of the landscape and with the weather, especially storms in winter. The word literally means old woman, hag, and is found within this meaning in modern Irish and Scottish Gaelic, and has been applied to numerous mythological and folkloric figures in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. In modern Irish folklore studies, she is sometimes known as the Hag of Beara, while in Scotland she is known as Beara, Queen of Winter. So I don't know if there's any connection between this and the ice spirit that the commenter mentioned, but anyway, interesting. Let's continue. So now we're going into Saskatchewan. And the first comment's from Brooks, SG8ZD, 4 years ago. I'm a First Nation native. My mom from northern Saskatchewan, Canada, always told me stories of little people. Her parents and grandparents told the same story. Don't believe they're fairies, but an ancient humanoid civilization, perhaps. Pretty interesting video. Next comment's Leo Davis, 1 year ago. My ex-wife is Indigenous and grew up in Saskatchewan and around the Qu'Appelle Valley. She told me many stories of the little people, personal experiences as well as some others she's heard. This was back in the early 90s. She told me these encounters. It was common in her community to hear these stories. Every now and then, when I go back to her home area, I still hear stories. Elders used to talk about them with great respect and fear. To this day, I know they are not tales, but they are very real. So the Qu'Appelle Valley is a very nice area in, I think it's southeastern Saskatchewan, and maybe a little bit of Manitoba, maybe I'm making that up. But it's, I think, a historic stomping grounds of the Cree, Plains Cree, and also, after the Red River Rebellion in the 1860s, that's when Louis Riel, Canada's famous rebel, Métis rebel, Métis people are, I'm actually part Métis. They're kind of a hybrid people born from mostly French-Canadian fur traders and like Cree mostly Cree and Ojibwe and Saulteaux Indians, women. Some of them are descended from Scottish fur traders, which is what my mom's side of the family's from. But it's mostly French Canadian and Native women. But they under the leadership of Louis Riel, he was kind of a prophet, maybe if you believe that, or crazy person, who led a rebellion in the 1860s when the Canadian government was trying to survey the land that the Métis people had lived on, and they didn't want to lose their homes. So they had a little rebellion. I don't think anybody was killed except for this one guy. He was a prisoner and was kind of causing trouble, and I think they executed him more just to show the government that they were serious. I don't think the execution was really warranted at all. And I think because of that, the Canadian army or militia marched out west with a fairly large force, and there was no fighting. I think Riel fled to the United States and stayed there until in the 1880s he came back and had the Northwest Rebellion, which was a real rebellion. I guess Canada, Western Canada's version of the Civil War. Very small affair compared to the Civil War. But anyways, where was I going with this? The point I wanted to make was that after the Red River Rebellion, that was the one in the 1860s, a lot of Métis kind of left their historic haunts on the Red River, which is in Manitoba, south of Lake Winnipeg, and they went into the Qu'Appelle Valley. So it's very, very Métis there. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's go to the next one. Melissa Watsky, 3835, 1 year ago. My brother attended St. Michael Residential School in Saskatchewan and said that the staff would talk about seeing the little people around the grounds of the school when working outside, just like the staff say in this video. So this is in response to, I think it's on my video on Rocky Mountain Legends, but there's stories that the staff of the Stoney Reservation would see little people running around the school. Anyway, let's continue. My late Kokum had attended the same school, but I'm not sure if she heard anything. She told my late mom the name of them, but she also said it's not good to talk about them and to give them respect and that they live near water and can walk into the ground. My cousin said she saw one in her room on the res one night when she was a young child. Another of my cousins also said she saw one outside the porta potty while waiting for her mom. I was staying in a hotel with her and her mom for the Indigenous summer games at Big River that time. I asked her what the little person looked like. She said the little person was an old man with a very wrinkly face, and the way she described it, looking at her, kind of freaked me out at the time. I was 10 or 11 years old at the time. It was very unnerving. But yes, they exist on the Saskatchewan Plains. Some elders explained to my cousin that she was to put ribbon and marbles in the bushes as an offering to them because they like those. Oh, and some people say they may take things, specifically shiny items, because they are said to like shiny items. Another time, me and a few other people were out at Bare Ass Beach, just outside of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, enjoying ourselves, and it was getting late. As we were visiting, it was beginning to get pitch black outside, just the moon and stars in the sky. There was a little fire in the bushes that started out of thin air. It was about 50 feet away, directly in the bushes, and it was contained to that little area. Obviously, someone was taking care of that little fire, and knew what they were doing, because the bushes above and around it didn't go up in flames. We were super shocked, and we left shortly after this. I haven't been out there since. Wow, those are very cool stories. I'll say that the wrinkly face of an old man is the same thing that I covered a story set in Alaska, I think, and some people saw a little person in the bush, and it was also described as an old-looking person with a very wrinkly face. And wrinkles are another thing that, in Newfoundland, the fairy stories, some people say that the fairies are supposed to look like very old people. So that's not a universal motif. A lot of times they look like young people, very fair-looking, but in other stories they're very ancient-looking. But anyway, very cool stories from Saskatchewan. Next comment's Calby Sean, 4571, 10 months ago. The first story reminds me of my bro. One night, in an area about 9 kilometers from Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan, he and his friends were having a drink. They were approached by little people. They offered tobacco and then took off. He quit drinking for some time after his experience that night. So that's interesting because in another story I covered from northern Manitoba, an encounter with a little person led to the person who had that experience quitting alcohol. So let me just find out, where's Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan? I don't know. Oh, so that's way up north, pretty close to the Manitoba border, deep in the boreal forest. Fair distance north of Flin Flon, which is pretty remote. Okay, let's keep going. This one's from Pomeranian 7, 5 months ago. I'm from Plains Cree territory. Thank you for collecting and telling these stories. Not only are they very spooky, but I imagine not a lot of people are even aware we have so many mysterious folk tales. Few are written down, and if you have no connections to those who know the stories, you are unlikely to hear them. I've heard a few interesting tales myself from elders within Sweetgrass First Nation, about mermaids in Manitou Lake near Neilburg, little people, and Stekini. Since I love scary stories, I quite enjoy these oral tales, and jump at the chance to hear more. I think it's important for others to take interest and make records of them for future listeners. Oral tradition is important, but we can help keep that alive by passing on the stories in other methods. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's what I tried to do here. So the Sweetgrass First Nation, I guess it's from the Sweetgrass Hills, which is in like northern Montana, pretty close to, like right across the Milk River from Riding on Stone Provincial Park in southern Alberta. But let's just find out where's Manitou Lake near Neilburg. Oh, I'm wrong. That's just dead in Saskatchewan. Pretty close to the Alberta border near Lloydminster, just south of Lloydminster, and east of North Battleford. So I guess the Sweetgrass Nation must be in the same area, not the Sweetgrass Hills. Okay, I gotta put that in my mermaid folder. Manitou Lake, Saskatchewan. Our last Saskatchewan story is from Leona Dubois 249, 5 months ago. I've been dealing with these little people in my small acreage in Saskatchewan. They lock up my chickens, sheep, and goats in their barns, and take my things and return them months later and other things. And that's a super common theme. They're tricksters. They'll play tricks on people. They'll take their things and then like return it for no apparent reason, like half a year later or something. That's a really common theme in Manitoba, Huldufolk stories, and in Newfoundland fairy stories. And now we're into Manitoba. First comment's from Jaw Breed 4 years ago. This is a very long-time commenter. Yes, the little people. They are black in color and move ridiculously swiftly. They are not friendly at all. Northern Manitoba. I was even shown where they live in that region. No kidding. It is a cliffside that is only easily accessible by boat. One of the strangest things I've seen. As you approach it off the Nelson River, you can see it's uneven with dark spots, roughly resembling a steep staircase. Up close, those dark spots are rectangular holes cut into the cliff, peppered along these stairs, descending from the densely treed top. Doorways. It's protected and feared by the locals. If you can find one, a Kimuk can tell you all about them. If you're lucky, fast enough, and can handle sitting in one place, you might catch a look at one. They like to steal things. Very interesting. And northern Manitoba is like woodland Cree country, swampy Cree country too. And the Cree little people stories almost always say that little people live inside cliffs, riverside cliffs. So this totally checks out with that. Next comment's George Kyler, 7563, 2 years ago. I see the little people all the time, and I also see them in my dreams. My friend in Manitoba has 5 living in his house, and he gives them trinkets so they don't harm him or anyone else. Another friend has one that follows her around, even to her workplace, but I don't think she's aware of them. Not all little people are dangerous. I now live back in my home province of British Columbia, and still see them. Boy, do they love the smell of yellow cedar. The next time I'm at our carving shack, I'll smudge the shack before inviting them in. Next comment's Whirlwind MN 1 year ago. Cheers from Manitoba. I grew up just north of Winnipeg, and have had several encounters with a little person 1 to 2 times a year, until I was in my teens. He showed up in spring and fall. I had one final encounter with him 10 years later. He was friendly and scary at the same time. There's a few stories like that of people who have kind of, for lack of a better word, like a pet little person. And most of these stories that I've received on my channel are concentrated in a folder I have on, I call it domestic stories. So we'll hopefully do that in a future video. But let's go to the next one. Is this the last one? It is. Last one from Manitoba, and the last one from Western Canada. From Greasy JH 10 months ago. We have little people in northern Manitoba. We call them Memagwese. I didn't realize how they were all across Canada. They have lots of stories, not just stories, but it is real, because they were seen lots of times when I grew up. I hear lots of stories, and I'm 41 years old now. Very cool. So, like I said, one of the most ubiquitous stories, and one of the least kind of sensational, but very, very common, and all over the place. So in the next video, we'll check out little people stories left on my channel from Eastern Canada. So see you in that video.